fundamentally, the spiritual process is about the transcendence of what we would call the ego. In order to realize the true self, the essence of the true self that is masqueraded by it. So the journey is one of transcending that imposter sense of self and remembering the true self. And so naturally, that process is characterized by a lot of undoing. Because so much of what we consider ourselves is actually not who we are. Ego is sometimes mistakenly equated with the body, or with a bodily self in a sense. But that's not actually true, although ego is related to body identification. I always love to describe ego as an imposter sense of self, a sense of a structure of patterning that is generating a sense of limitation, of limited self. It's generating a sense of a set of responses to life circumstances as a protective mechanism initially that has simply not been outgrown. And so the life stream, the true self, has not found its wholeness in that sense yet, has not yet merged again with its own wholeness. And so life is constantly seen through this lens of separation, this lens of being an isolated self, an isolated little thing in a huge cosmos of uncertainty, completely disconnected from all other life processes, on your own, having to fend for yourself. That's essentially the structure of ego. And it's fueled by the mind, by constant thinking, by life force not re-entering into full circuitry, and therefore being stuck in the animation of constant thinking, thought processes. And oftentimes, transcending the ego in action, in daily life, is not some kind of grandiose thing. In fact, it usually never is. Transcending the ego is usually something as simple as listening to a quieter voice of intuition rather than following some extremely excited, animated, super energized voice that is a little bit more superficially charged. And that can be the case in any scenario of life, right? It can be about relationships, about work situations, investment decisions. Funny enough, talk about investment decisions. I've noticed in my own journey so many times, there was a very subtle intuitive voice told me exactly when to exit an investment at the most profitable stage. And whenever I didn't do that in those moments, it was always because I was listening to another voice that was a little bit more loud, a voice fueled by greed, a voice fueled by some kind of construct, some kind of pattern that would twist the interpretation of the situation in order to paint its picture and convince me of its information, of its perspective. And funny enough, the calmer, intuitive voice, the more subtle voice, was always on point, always knew exactly what to do. But it was not a voice that came from the mind. It was a deeper, more intuitive voice. And so many times, transcending the ego in practical life will involve something along the lines of sort of cutting through the voices of the ego, cutting through the patterns, cutting through the emotions generated by ego responses. Or perhaps you feel awkward in certain situations, you feel weird to talk to someone, and then still like letting that movement happen naturally, talking to that person. Sort of like not letting the egoic pattern become the driving force of the situation. That is the process in action in many, many, many ways. Of course, there can be much more intense situations or intense practice moments, also in solitude. But overall, life is a whole thing. Life in itself, life, the core of life, is not some fragmented thing. Life is whole, which makes us all connected. Whether we like it or not, or whether we believe it or not, it doesn't matter. It's true. We're all arising in the same space. We're all arising in the same consciousness, in the same sphere of consciousness. And so there is a natural connection to all things, and there's a natural benevolent evolution to all things. The chaos and the destructiveness happens when ego gets its way, when ego takes the helm, right? There's a beautiful part in the Course in Miracles where Jesus talks about the ego's dynamic range. He talks about the ego's range being one from suspiciousness to viciousness. I think this is a really, really cool thing to be aware of, because it's true that when not threatened in most ordinary situations, that pattern, that gremlin ego pattern is kind of in the background. It's not super active, it's not on high alert. It's just, just there to make sure that, you're not working against it somehow, or you're not transcending it too much. But when triggered profoundly, all of a sudden it can switch to viciousness in an instant. And I think everyone has experienced that, right? And being aware of that and sort of even prepared for it in a sense. You understand that what can well up inside of you when the ego is triggered is not you, is not your essence, it's not your life force, it's not, has nothing to do with real life, it's just ego pattern being triggered and fighting for survival. So it's working against you, but it's masquerading as you. And this is the tricky thing, and this is why it's the natural evolution that we're right now going through is one of co-creating an ego-transcendent society, or a social dynamic in which we can interact truly and authentically, and no longer from that limitation of ego. And as ego is more and more cornered as a result of all of this momentum that is happening globally. There is an awakening going on. There is a transformation going on. There is a raising of energy going on. And you can see the principle of ego rearing its head everywhere, left and right, in all kinds of ways, right? Things going crazy sometimes. And we can see that in our own experiences as well sometimes. When you all of a sudden feel overwhelmed for like no really apparent reason, you feel emotionally super activated, these kinds of things. Or you feel that you can no longer figure out a situation, or you can no longer solve it with the thinking mind. And many times it's true, many times we can't. Because the thinking mind is a tool, it's not a self. And at the same time, we're not used to interact beyond ego, transcendent of ego, in a truly surrendered and trusting flow in which there is an actual circuitry of life force at play. We're not used to that. We're used to everyone in their corner, separate from each other, no energetic connection, guard up, and then strategizing what to do. That's what we're used to as a society. Probably not you, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. So you are in a very different energy space, most likely, right? So, but this is sort of the next iteration of society that we are here to shepherd into existence. A communication, a level of connection that transcends egoic thought, and that is real and safe as a context in which to transcend and drop egoic identification, where it is easier to feel and know that ego pattern is no longer needed in order to offer a sense of protection, even if it never was that effective at protecting us to begin with. And so, yeah, in our daily experiences, triggers will come up all the time. Ego will be triggered. This pattern will be triggered. It may not even be personal to you. It may simply be part of the universal societal broadcast hitting the antenna of your psychophysical structure. And being aware of that, knowing that, coming back to this field of communication, coming back to this state of being, to this core state of beingness, is what will help you and what will help you navigate that transition with far more ease. And connecting with others who are undergoing the same process and who are willing and capable of connecting, joining in these new vibrations, is what's going to help you tremendously moving forward in this transition. Much love to you, and thank you for being here.